Emma pressed her palm against the cool plaster, feeling the subtle vibration beneath her fingertips. Mark? Do you feel that? Her husband looked up from the stack of moving boxes labeled kitchen in his messy scroll. Feel what? The walls. They're humming. Mark crossed the spacious living room of their new Victorian home, the hardwood floors creaking beneath his weight. He placed his hand next to hers, frowning slightly. I don't feel anything, Em. Probably just the old pipe settling. Emma nodded, but something in her expression remained unconvinced. They'd only been in the house for 3 days, and while she'd fallen in love with the place at first sight, the stained glass windows, the ornate crown molding, the sprawling garden out back, something felt off. At night, she'd wake to whispers so faint she couldn't quite make out the words. You're right, she said, forcing a smile. I'm just being silly. Mark kissed her forehead. This is our dream home, remember? We got it for a steal. I know, Emma said, trying to ignore the way the word steal made her stomach tighten. The previous owners had practically given the place away, eager to move cross-country after only 6 months in residence. That night, Emma jolted awake to the sound of scratching. Not mice, something different. Like fingernails dragging across stone. Mark, she whispered, nudging her sleeping husband. He groaned and rolled over. The scratching continued, seeming to come from inside the wall behind their bed. Emma reached for the lamp on her nightstand, but the switch clicked uselessly. Power outage. Heart pounding, she grabbed her phone, illuminating the room with its pale blue light. The scratching stopped abruptly. Hello? She called out, immediately feeling foolish. The house was old, over 100 years. Old houses made noise. Yet as she lay back down, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had responded to her voice. That the silence that followed her hello wasn't coincidental but deliberate. You look terrible, Mark said the next morning, pouring coffee into Emma's mug. Bad dreams? Emma stared into the dark liquid. I heard something last night. In the walls. Probably just the house settling. Or mice. Mark frowned. Should I call an exterminator? No, Emma said quickly. Something about the idea of strangers prying into their walls made her uneasy. No, it's fine. I'm still adjusting, that's all. Mark nodded, but worry creased his forehead. Hey, how about we go into town today? Get lunch at that cute bistro we saw? Might do us good to get out of the house for a bit. Emma smiled gratefully. That sounds perfect. Millfield was a quintessential small town, one main street lined with quaint shops, a park with a gazebo in the center, and friendly locals who smiled as they passed. Emma and Mark settled into a table at the Copper Pot, a bistro with exposed brick walls and mismatched furniture. How are you two liking the old Blackwood place? Their waitress asked as she set down their waters. It's beautiful, Mark replied enthusiastically. Though it's taking some getting used to, Emma added. The house makes the strangest sounds at night. The waitress, Darlene, according to her name tag, paused. Old houses do talk, don't they? Something in her tone made Emma lean forward. Did you know the previous owners? She asked. The Millers. Darlene's smile tightened. Everyone knows everyone in Millfield. The Millers didn't stay long. Do you know why they left? Emma pressed. Said the house wasn't right for them. Darlene shrugged. Can I get you folks started with some appetizers? The abrupt change of subject wasn't lost on Emma, but she let it go. As they ate, she noticed an elderly man at the counter repeatedly glancing their way. The guy at the counter keeps staring at us, she whispered to Mark. Mark turned subtly. Maybe he's the local welcoming committee. As if on cue, the man rose from his stool and approached their table. He was tall and thin, with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes. Forgive me for intruding, he said, his voice surprisingly strong for someone his age. I couldn't help but overhear you're the new owners of the Blackwood house. That's right, Mark said, extending his hand. Mark Hamilton. This is my wife, Emma. Walter Keane. The old man shook Mark's hand but kept his eyes on Emma. The house has stood empty much of its life. People say it's particular about its owners. Emma felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. What do you mean? Walter smiled enigmatically. Just local gossip. I taught history at the high school for 40 years. I have a certain fondness for the stories that shape our town. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. If you're ever curious about your home's past, I've got quite the collection of Millfield archives. Emma took the card, feeling strangely like she'd been handed a key. Thank you, she said. We might take you up on that. Walter nodded, his eyes lingering on Emma's face. The house chose you, he said softly, before turning and walking away. Mark snorted. Well, that was cryptic. But Emma slipped the card into her pocket, feeling the weight of it like a promise. That night, Emma dreamed of stone altars and robed figures. She woke gasping, the sheets tangled around her legs like bindings. Emma? Mark mumbled sleepily beside her. Just a nightmare, she whispered, but the room felt wrong, the shadows deeper, the air thicker. She got up, padding barefoot to the bathroom. The cold tile made her shiver as she splashed water on her face. When she looked up, the mirror showed not just her reflection but something else, a shadowy figure standing behind her. Emma whirled around, but the bathroom was empty. Turning back to the mirror, she saw only herself, pale, wide-eyed. She made her way downstairs, needing distance from the bedroom. In the kitchen, she put the kettle on for tea, then noticed the cellar door was ajar. They'd barely explored the cellar, a damp, unfinished space they planned to renovate into a wine room eventually. Something pulled her toward it. The door creaked as she pushed it wider, revealing stone steps disappearing into darkness. Emma flipped the light switch, but like last night, nothing happened. Using her phone's flashlight, she descended cautiously. The cellar was larger than she remembered, stretching beyond where the foundation of the house should end. The walls were old stone, not the brick she'd expected. Her light caught something etched into one wall, symbols she didn't recognize, carved deep into the rock. They seemed to pulse in the beam of her flashlight. What are you doing down here? Emma jumped, nearly dropping her phone. Mark stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the kitchen light. I couldn't sleep, she said. Come look at this. Mark descended, squinting at the wall where Emma's light illuminated the strange markings. Here. Previous owner must have been into some weird art. These aren't new, Mark. Emma traced a finger along one symbol, a spiral surrounded by what looked like flames. These are carved into the stone. They're old. Mark frowned, crouching to examine them more closely. Maybe the house was built on older foundations? This area has history going back to colonial times. Maybe, Emma murmured, but her mind was racing to Walter's words. The house chose you. The next day, while Mark was at a meeting with a potential local client, Emma drove into town. Walter's business card listed an address on Elm Street, a modest bungalow with a meticulously maintained garden. He answered the door before she could knock, as if he'd been waiting. Mrs. Hamilton, I've been expecting you. Emma hesitated on the doorstep. I have questions about our house. Walter smiled. Yes, I imagine you do. Please, come in. His home was crammed with books and artifacts, framed maps, glass cases containing what looked like archaeological specimens, and photographs of excavation sites. You're more than a history teacher, Emma observed as Walter led her to a study lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. In my youth, I was an archaeologist, he explained, gesturing for her to sit. I specialized in pre-colonial religious practices of indigenous peoples in this region. And what does that have to do with our house? Emma asked, though a part of her already knew. Walter pulled a large leather-bound book from a shelf. Your home was built in 1886 by Theodore Blackwood, a wealthy industrialist with an interest in the occult. But the land it sits on. He opened the book to a marked page, showing her a detailed drawing of what appeared to be a stone temple. That land has been considered sacred for centuries. Emma stared at the drawing, recognition flaring. The stone walls, the symbols, it matched what she'd seen in their cellar. Your cellar isn't just a cellar, Mrs. Hamilton. It's the remains of a temple built by a people who lived in this area long before European settlers arrived. They worshipped old gods, nature deities, primarily, but also practiced communication with the spirit world. Are you saying our house is haunted? Emma asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Walter smiled. Not haunted, no. More like occupied. The temple served as a gateway between worlds. The veil between realities is thin there. And the previous owners? The Millers. Left because they couldn't handle what they experienced, Walter said simply. But the house, or perhaps what resides in its foundations, is selective. It doesn't reveal itself to everyone. Why me? Emma whispered. Walter studied her. Some people are more sensitive to such things. More compatible with the energies of the place. Emma thought of the humming walls, the whispers in the night. What do they want? That, Walter said, is what you need to discover. Mark was skeptical when Emma relayed Walter's information. So our house is built on an ancient temple, and the spirits want to communicate with you specifically? He asked, eyebrows raised. The guy's probably just a local eccentric. Then how do you explain the symbols in the cellar? The noises? Emma challenged. Mark sighed. Look, I'm not saying there isn't something unusual about this place. But ancient temples and spirits? That's a bit much. Come with me, Emma said suddenly, standing up. I want to show you something. She led him to the cellar, this time bringing a powerful flashlight. The symbols were exactly as she remembered, intricate carvings spiraling across the stone. Okay, so there are some weird carvings, Mark conceded. But that doesn't mean. He stopped as Emma directed the beam to the far corner of the cellar, revealing what looked like a doorway, a perfect arch cut into the stone, but filled in with newer brick. That wasn't there before, Mark said, his voice hushed. No, Emma agreed. It wasn't. They spent the afternoon carefully removing the bricks, revealing a narrow passage beyond. The air that drifted out was surprisingly fresh, with an earthy scent. We should call someone, Mark said, hesitating at the dark opening. The Historical Society, maybe. But Emma was already stepping through, drawn by something she couldn't name. The passage sloped downward, the walls closed on either side. Her flashlight beam caught more symbols etched into the stone, the same as in the cellar, but more elaborate, more numerous. The passage opened into a circular chamber about 15 feet across. In the center stood a stone altar, its surface carved with the spiral symbol Emma had noticed earlier. This is it, she breathed. The temple. Mark followed her into the chamber, his expression a mix of awe and disbelief. This can't be real. But it was real, the smooth stone beneath their feet, the symbols that seemed to shift in the dancing light, the altar that radiated a faint warmth when Emma placed her hand on it. As her palm made contact with the stone, the whisper she'd been hearing grew louder, more distinct, no longer just noise but words in a language she somehow understood. You have returned. Did you hear that? She asked Mark, her voice trembling. He shook his head, eyes wide. Hear what? Emma felt something shift within her, a recognition, a remembering. They think I've returned. That I'm someone else. Emma, you're scaring me, Mark said, reaching for her arm. Let's go back up. But as his fingers grazed her skin, the room changed. The air thickened, the darkness deepened, and the whispers rose to a chorus that filled every corner of the chamber. The circle completes. The doorway opens. Mark's face contorted in sudden fear. Do you see them? He gasped, backing away. There are shapes, shadows. Emma saw them too now, figures emerging from the walls, their forms shifting between solid and vapor. They surrounded the altar, their whispers a language both ancient and familiar. Priestess. Keeper. Guardian. We need to leave, Mark said urgently, tugging at her arm. Now, Emma. But Emma stood transfixed, the words echoing in her mind. Priestess. Keeper. Guardian. She'd heard those words before, in dreams she couldn't recall upon waking, in memories that weren't quite her own. One of the figures separated from the others, moving toward her with purpose. As it drew closer, Emma saw it was a woman, tall, with long dark hair and eyes that reflected the light like pools of water. You carry her blood, the figure whispered directly into Emma's mind. the last priestess. The one who sealed the door when the settlers came, who promised to return when the time was right. I don't understand, Emma said aloud. Your dreams. Your pull to this place. The house did not choose you by chance. The chamber began to vibrate, the symbols on the walls glowing with an inner light. Emma. Mark shouted, his voice distant despite him being right beside her. Something's happening, we need to go. The female figure reached out, her hand passing through Emma's chest, sending ice through her veins. The temple has waited. The gateway must be tended. Will you take your place? Will you be the keeper? Emma felt a weight settling over her, the weight of choice, of destiny. The house had called to her. The temple had been waiting. For her. What does that mean? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. What would I have to do? Maintain the balance. Keep the doorway sealed, yet allow the necessary passage. Be our voice in your world, as we are the voice of the beyond. Mark was pulling at her desperately now, his face pale with terror. The ceiling, it's moving. Emma looked up to see the stone above them rippling like water, shapes pressing through from the other side. If I say no, she asked the figure, then the doorway will seek another. But it has chosen you. It responds to your blood, your spirit. You feel it, do you not? And she did, a connection to this place that had been there from the moment she'd first stepped inside the house. A sense of belonging that went beyond the physical. Emma, please, Mark begged, tears streaming down his face. I don't know what you're seeing or hearing, but this place is wrong. We have to leave. Emma looked at her husband, the man she loved, the life they'd planned in this house they thought was just a house. Then she looked at the figures surrounding them, at the gateway that trembled on the verge of opening or closing forever. She made her decision. 3 months later, the Hamilton house was the talk of Millfield. The extensive renovations, the historical society's interest in the archaeological find in the cellar, the strange lights sometimes seen in the upstairs windows at night. But most of all, people talked about the change in Emma Hamilton, how she'd gone from the nervous newcomer to a woman of quiet confidence. How she'd started a historical appreciation group that met in her home each full moon. How flowers bloomed in her garden regardless of season. Walter Keane became a frequent visitor to the house, often seen deep in conversation with Emma as they walked the grounds. Some said they were cataloging the historical significance of the property. Others whispered of stranger things. Mark Hamilton smiled and welcomed visitors, showed off the renovated cellar, now a beautiful stone-walled meditation room centered around what he called an original architectural feature, the altar, left intact but repurposed as a table for artifacts found during the renovation. If visitors noticed the symbols etched into the walls, he explained them as indigenous art they'd chosen to preserve out of respect. If they commented on the unusual atmosphere of the house, the way sounds sometimes echoed strangely, the occasional whisper that seemed to come from nowhere, he laughed it off as the charm of an old home. And if they stayed late enough to see Emma slip away to the cellar alone, to watch her place her hands on the altar and close her eyes in what looked like communion with something unseen, well, that was simply the lady of the house enjoying her private meditation. Only Mark knew what had happened in that underground chamber 3 months ago, how Emma had placed her hands on the altar and spoken words in a language she shouldn't have known. How the trembling ceiling had stilled, the figures had retreated into the walls, the gateway had sealed itself more securely than before. How she turned to him afterward, her eyes reflecting a knowledge that hadn't been there before, and said simply, I am the keeper now. Their dream home was more than they'd bargained for, built not just atop a pagan temple but around it, incorporating it, channeling its energies. The walls still whispered, but now Emma whispered back. The house still hummed with power, but now that power had direction, purpose. Mark had adjusted, as humans do. He loved his wife, even this new version of her who sometimes spoke of things he couldn't understand, who sometimes seemed to be listening to voices he couldn't hear. And if sometimes in the dead of night he woke to find her gone from their bed, standing in the garden beneath the moon with her arms raised to the sky, or kneeling before the altar in the cellar surrounded by dancing shadows, well, that was the price of living in a house that had chosen them. Or rather, had chosen her. For the house hadn't just been waiting for an owner. It had been waiting for its priestess to return.